Scott, thank you so much. Very beautiful, beautiful talk. I love the way it sort of built and moved, and so powerful at the end. Really beautiful. I'm just wondering whether would you invite questions if anybody had any?
If you're game, we'll see how that goes.
I think if anybody would like to, share something or ask something, maybe raise a hand or put it in the chat. Hey, can we? If they raise a hand, will we be able to unmute them, or is it easier than?
Yes, that sends them to the top of the participant list.
Yeah.
So yes.
So if you don't know how to do that, you go to reactions and press that reactions button, then the raise hand option is there. If you'd like to ask anything, please do so, or you could also use the chat. Yeah, I felt there was a fresh look, Scott, even though you're right, it has been touched on through these pandemic months. But really, that was a fresh take. I love the way you handled and led us through those opposites. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Henry. Thank you.
Is that guy the character in Dinner with Andre? Is that right?
Yeah. That's who they're talking about. That's not Grotowski himself, but they're talking about Grotowski. Yeah.
Yeah. And Eleanor has a hand.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for taking my question. When you were speaking of an acting coach, I believe it was, you mentioned stripping away the obstacles of authenticity. I was wondering if you could talk about what those are.
Yeah, I can give some thoughts about that. Peter Brook is another great reference for this. The guy I was referencing was Jerzy Grotowski. He wrote a book called Towards a Poor Theater back in the 60s. And his intent, like Peter Brook's at the time, was to take away the rich theater, this gilded theater that had built up these artificial kinds of approaches to acting. And so, Peter Brook would talk about how someone is trying to do Shakespeare in the 20th century, for example, or now the 21st century, but back in the 1960s and 70s, someone trying to do Shakespeare, and they're imitating an actor that they heard do Shakespeare 10 years ago, who was imitating an actor they heard doing Shakespeare 10 years prior to that, who was imitating blah, 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 And so there's this imitation of imitation of imitation of imitation. And so the actor really is performing in a vacuum, a sort of a falseness that just relies on artifice. So mellowed tones and musical speech and particular kinds of makeup and gestures that are imitations of imitations. And it was just deadly was the phrase that Peter Brook would use, deadly theater. And he wanted to make theater rough and tumble again. And Grotowski had a similar urgent philosophical need to make theater wake people up. He was influenced philosophically in theater by Antoine Artaud, who came a little before and never really realized his vision of theater. But his vision of theater was that it should shock the audience into awareness, instead of this complacent, we're going to the theater, aren't we elite, and aren't we super good, and we'll go to the party after and talk about it, But he wanted them to wake up to something of life and death. So the actors, and you have to also recognize where Grotowski was coming from Cold War Poland, where he had been in a concentration camp. He was Catholic, had been in a concentration camp the Russians had imprisoned him at one point, and so a lot of his pieces were echoing that experience. And he talked about seeing prisoners in the concentration camp who were stripped of all their dignity, stripped of all their identity, who would just have the most poignant facial expressions and body language, and would have a courtship with a mop, just anything to cope. And so he thought that was a little more interesting than showing us how well you can enunciate the native tongue, or how beautifully you can pose. But it was really, he had studied Stanislavski, which is the method acting, if you're familiar with that, which required or asked actors to plunge into their own psychic, their own history, their own experience. So if you're playing, say, a death scene, or a scene where someone is dying, that you might reflect on an actual moment in your life where someone you loved or knew was dying, or a pet or something, just to color and give nuance to your acting. But Grotowski had a lot of exercises that helped actors break down their own resistances, and some of them probably weren't documented. They were probably kind of harsh, I think. But some of them were put down in the book, Towards a Poor Theater. And he used this sort of dynamic yoga, for one thing. So instead of a still kind of pose, like I don't know yoga, so I'll have to make this up, but like a still kind of cobra pose, he would have this pose where, you start this way, but then you just let it all go and you fall. And you had to learn to keep your head tilted back. I did this a number of times. You have to learn to keep your head tilted back and to the side to keep from crashing your skull, So he put actors in a bit of danger to get them to, free up their psychological blocks. I hope that helped.
We have a chat.
Okay. Jesse asks, would your words be different if all the world is disease? Trick question. Nope. I might say disease more than medicine, but it'd be the same, wouldn't it? But I don't know. What do you think?
You want me to talk to you, Scott?
Hey, Jesse. Yes. Hi.
What do I think? Well, the Zen answer, of course, is the words would not be any different.
Right.
Of course. But the humans listening to you and the people experiencing medicine and disease in their lives differently in those two ways.
Yes.
They want to hear something.
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I in fact, I didn't include this. I kind of meant to say, by the way, schizophrenia is horrible. By the way, cancer is horrible. By the way, Alzheimer's is horrible. So this isn't nice. This isn't, disease is medicine. Yay. It's not like that.
Scott, if you want to take a look, there's a longer one in the chat as well.
Okay. All right. Your talk reminded me of how plant toxins can be deadly or healing, and it depends on the dosage. And also you triggered a vision of medicine and disease as a seesaw, where the move back and forth is how we learn balance or adapt. And only by moving between the two can we progress, both necessary in order to create change in us. That's from Farnaz. Yeah, that's lovely. That's well said. Yeah, we know vaccines, the old-fashioned ones at least, come from, just this modicum of the disease, right? So our bodies are trained by the disease to fight the disease. And, there's always, not always, but there's sometimes at least a healing grace through, I was blinded, but now I hear like I never heard before. Can hear people say that kind of thing. Or someone's illness gave me reason to care for them and be compassionate, and I grew through that, So yeah, of course, there's a seesaw, but this is one thing.
So, Scott, if I may just ask, on the level of the koan, on the level of what Unmon is seeing, the world he's seeing, is there a seesaw?
No seesaw. There's a sea.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just playing. The whole world. So even the seesaw is medicine and disease. Even. What would you say to that, Henry?
I just love the final question. Why you really?
Yeah.
But we have another hand, Karen.
If you can hear me now.
No.
I'm not Karen.
I'm not Valerie.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that much about Zen, and I know even less about psychology. But at least superficially, they don't strike me as being compatible. And since you got feet in both worlds, can you comment on how they're compatible or not? And how psychology might lead to following Zen or not?
Yeah, great question. And Karen, you can pitch in here too. I got to meet more deeply Karen during the Rahatsu, who's also a therapist and knows a thing or two about Zen.
No, different Karen.
But different Karen. Karen Kleinfelter. So so they are different. Certainly meditation is a tool for self-improvement, can be, and I think it's a good tool for therapists to practice for their own self-care and for their own development of compassion. And in that sense, I think Zen's great. But it's easy to let your own stuff, your own poison, get activated with those poisons that the clients are working through. And you want to be skillful. And, our training is, largely about the appropriate ways to react and not react. But having that tool or that skill or that practice of observing and waiting is good. And many times it's a useful tool to teach clients. Just another device like relaxation therapy has been around for a long time. It's the hallmark of behavior therapy. Actually, you can learn to relax your body. You can't be at that moment anxious, and you can't be at that moment angry. And in some senses, you can't even be depressed. The body has to be tense. The mind has to be tense for these emotions to stick around anywhere. So if you can really train a person to do that, or help a person learn to do that, it's helpful. But tread lightly would be my advice to a therapist in that sense, because you can get really sidetracked. It can be palliative, but not penetrative. You cannot penetrate. You need to not also, and flipping it a little bit, as a newbie in the Zen teaching trade, one thing I'm counseling myself, I talked with Karen about this too. So I want to be careful not to make Doksan, the individual interview with student and teacher, into therapy. Ruben Roshi is very clear about that. Very clear that Zen is not therapy. It certainly has beneficial effects on the organism, and I think it makes people more compassionate over time, at least can. Wiser, maybe. Seeing things more clearly, and with more equanimity. I think those are all good things, but people come to therapy for a billion other reasons, and we need to honor that. And so, flipping back again to, if I'm not careful, I'm afraid that I'll start saying, "Well, tell me more about your mother," in the Doksan room, and
ask, would you be willing to say what you see as the core distinguishing feature of the project in Zen that definitely marks it out as different from the project of therapy? Albeit that may be very various, but is there a core? Really?
Yeah. If you take the school of therapy called humanism literally, and self-actualization literally, you could say that the project is closing in on the same territory, but that's not really happening very much. And so these peak experiences that are described in the literature of existential therapy and in humanistic therapy, and sound a little like Kensho. They sound a little like the breakthrough experiences that happen in Zen sometimes. And so I would say the Zen experiment is, to use similar words, whether they mean exactly the same thing, the Zen experiment is toward a more authentic self, toward a truer self, toward your self that's before you were born. And I don't think that project exists in psychotherapy. It's really psychotherapy's got a lot of different aims in a lot of different levels, but generally, to be cynical, you could say what Freud said, that psychoanalysis, I think he said, is just helping people get back to the misery of neurosis.
Because how about this? Like you was talking about, was it Grotowski is saying that stripping away the obstacles to an authentic self.
Yeah.
In that acting project, but in Zen, you're talking about getting to a more authentic self. What is the primary obstacle to finding, if we're going to call it an authentic self? I'm hesitating, but if we're going to call it that, what's
Okay. Yeah, it's a nasty word. The primary obstacle is, I would say, this may sound a little textbooky, but the delusion of separateness. You know, the insistence that you are you, I'm me. I'm not even me. I'm me and him and her, and you know, let alone, you know, we are one. I'm not even one. So that's the main obstacle, I think. That insistence that there's this and that.
Of being a separate self.
Yeah.
The obstacle is the illusory self.
Yeah.
That's Zen's project. Is to
Yeah.
clarify.
Yeah.
And they don't. That's not the project. And whatever they mean in humanism about an authentic self, humanistic self, it's not to see through the self.
No. No.
Yeah. Glad we agreed on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's enough time. I mean, it's fantastic. Thank you, Scott, for being willing to have this discussion. Actually, it's been very
Thank you.
beautiful talk. Very beautiful talk. Huge gratitude to you, and thanks to the discussion participants bringing up questions. And thanks to Peg once again, running the evening very beautifully, and as she did all week on last week's retreat, was marvelous, steady, geeky you could ever hope for. And thank you, Scott, so very, very much.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it so much. And there was this last question. There were several at the end, but one of them said, "Wait a minute, Apposition, Zen." Or therapy brought me to Zen, or Zen brought me to therapy. I can't remember now, but yeah, that happens. That happens. I mean, in fact, psychology brought me to Zen. You know, what can I say?